Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. So we're speaking on the impact of the amendment to the Beekeepers Bill on the local industry. Joining us in studio this morning is Darren Mahabir, Public Relations Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Beekeepers Association and also a beekeeper, and Marlon Cowie-Clark, former president of the Trinidad and Tobago Beekeepers Association and a beekeeper as well. Good morning to both of you and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thanks for being with us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you here. And let me say an admiration and kudos for what you do. Having gone to an apiary myself for the Now Morning Show, it definitely was an experience. So I can only imagine how hard you both work and why this is such a critical conversation for both of you. So let's get straight into it. Darren, let's start with you. Can you share with us what these amendments are and how they could affect the local beekeeping industry?
I would say the amendments would affect the local beekeeping industry in possibly three major ways: economic way, ecological way, and as well as with respect to food security and sustainability of the local agricultural sector. Because, as you know, bees play an important role in the pollination of crops and thereby food production locally and globally. Economically, I would say that the bees, the act, would affect the economic aspect of the local industry by having an excess of bee products, especially honey, on the market, thereby affecting the sustainability of local beekeepers to continue to ply their trade. As with any sector, if you have an increase in commodity, you would also have a decrease in price because you would have a increase in supply. You have an increase in supply on the market to meet a definite finite amount of demand. Sorry, go ahead.
No, okay, so I was going to ask, so specifically, so the amendments right now, if I'm not mistaken, are to do with the importation, is that correct?
Yes, transshipment and importation of honey.
Okay, and I mean, for many of us, many will be asking, well, how is it going to affect it, particularly considering the fact that we have what we would consider a thriving industry here, do we?
I would say we have a decently thriving or growing industry with respect to beekeeping, because every year we have new beekeepers coming into the industry. However, if you have the main product of that industry being substituted for a foreign product, we don't have the sustainability of the market share to allow for that amount of honey to come into our market share. For example, with any commodity that you have, we don't want the price being dropped to the point where it's not feasible for someone to continue in beekeeping.
Agreed.
You know.
And is this something that is already affected, or are we looking to the future and saying this is a consideration?
It is a consideration, but is somewhat affected by, because we already have illegal honey coming into the country that is way below the market price of honey, whereby it's not very feasible to continue to compete with that said price. And even the illegal honey that is coming into the country, we are not even guaranteed that it is actually pure honey. Most times it is actually adulterated honey.
Right, so that's something that we definitely need to get into as well when it comes to the honey itself and the quality, because it's so important. And many people go to honey because it's a better alternative when it comes to sugar and so much more. But let's bring you into the conversation, Marlon. Good morning again.
Good morning.
Let's talk about the importance of the local beekeeping industry as of right now.
Right, so the industry plays a major role in terms of pollination for the agriculture sector. We, as beekeepers, do several things. We mainly make honey or produce honey from our bees, but in producing honey, we do a lot of pollination for the farmers and for the natural fruits that occur in Trinidad and Tobago. The additional thing in terms of how important that sector is, as beekeepers, we also play a role in protecting the 9 native species of stingless bees that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago. And those bees are very key to pollinating specific types of flowers, for example, orchids, things like vanilla, etc., that are bee-specific and native bee species-specific.
Okay. Now, when it came to the consultation of these changes, were the local stakeholders included or no?
Yes, we will. However, the recommendations that we put forward wasn't considered in the amendments.
And what recommendations were put forward by the TTBA?
So, for example, we recommended the reestablishment of the APRIS unit. The APRIS unit was disbanded in 1987. Since then, beekeepers have had very little support from the ministry in terms of technical support. And this amendment as well, if you actually go through the amendment, you would see that it lacks technical knowledge in terms of bees and in terms of how beekeepers operate.
Something definitely to be considered. So with these current amendments, what is the stance of the TTBA?
I'll leave this one up to Marlon.
Sure. The stance of the TTBA is simple. Let's take a step back, go through the amendments again, look at the recommendation that are being put forward by the TTBA, and try to implement some of those recommendations. So when the amendment came out, we actually sat with Dr. Hallam, who is a trained entomologist, along with several other beekeepers. And what we realized is that the current amendment doesn't really reflect anything that any trained beekeeper would know. So
okay.
I'll give you an example. The amendment speaks to specifically Apis mellifera sculetella, which is the West African bee.
Okay.
Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have Africanized bee, which is a hybrid between sculetella and, let's say, linguistica. In Tobago, they have linguistica alone. So it means that this law doesn't apply to our fellow beekeepers in Tobago. So in terms of stepping back, the recommendation here is, okay, let's step back, get some beekeeping experts, look at the law, look at the amendment, and then make the recommended changes and move forward from there.
Okay, understood. So definitely some consideration is needed in this. Now, as we speak about consideration, one of the things that we don't necessarily focus on are the challenges that beekeepers face themselves in Trinidad and Tobago. We're very quick to talk about the price of honey, but not necessarily what goes into why it is that price. So let's perhaps go into some of the challenges that beekeepers face. Both of you are beekeepers, yes. So we'd love to hear it from both of your perspectives. Let's start with you.
I would say outright, the main challenge currently is climate change. As you have noticed, for the past few years, we don't have a regular weather pattern. So we have extremely dry seasons and extremely rainy seasons. As with last year, we had an extremely dry rainy season because of the El Nino system, which caused a decrease in production of honey. And because there's a decrease in production of honey, that is reflective of a decrease in availability of natural food sources for the bees. So they would have a decrease in the amount of nectar and pollen available to them, whereby making beekeeping a little bit more challenging, where you have to supplement feed, you have to be in your hives a little bit more regularly to help expand those hives, to help expand the apiaries. The other difficulty, I would say, the other challenging aspect of beekeeping would be deforestation and loss of habitat, access to actual land tenure for beekeepers to set up the apiaries. Most beekeepers, they already just have the apiaries in random places in the forest that they could find access to without actual documentation or ability to register those sites based on the current laws. And even in the proposed law, it would be very detrimental to beekeepers to have that opportunity. Reason being, there's one aspect of the proposed amendment that speaks about having a $100,000 fine to a beekeeper that, one, does not have a registered apiary, and they don't even have access to get a registered apiary if they don't own land or have a possibility of getting land leased to them. Another aspect would be the part that speaks about having a distance in from your nearest neighbor, which is something like 200 meters. When you do the calculation on that, is you have to have access to almost 40 acres of land to set up one apiary. And if you don't have that, you're liable to a $100,000 fine. So that would be tied back into the access to land for beekeepers. If you can't have access to 40 acres of land, which not much people have access to, it does not make it very viable to get into that industry because you're already faced with a $100,000 fine, especially for beekeepers that have maybe 1 or 2 hives. think about it, someone who starts beekeeping with 1 or 2 hives and they don't have that access to the 40 acres of land, they're off the bat liable to $100,000 fine. That might be income for someone for a few years, you know. The other aspect that is challenging is perennial larceny. A lot of beekeepers actually lose their entire crop of honey to larceny.
Wow.
Currently, I know of 2 beekeepers that lost their entire income for the year last year because of larceny. Then we have the illegal quarrying as well. That could be tied into deforestation. But these things are not actually regulated when you look at it. The beekeepers themselves have to face all these challenges every year after year. That's some things that are out of our control, like climate change, that I spoke about. But it is a challenging industry, but it is also an industry that is mandatory, I think, for any country, not just Trinidad and Tobago, because the bees are so important here.
Yeah, they definitely are important. And no doubt, I mean, with all the challenges that you just mentioned, but also keeping the industry alive, because that is essentially what you do. Marlon, anything to add to what Darren just shared?
So added to that, I would actually speak to the support from the Ministry of Agriculture. Since the disbandment of the AP's unit in 1987, we've had one person from the ministry side to support. We're talking about over 400 beekeepers, close to 4,000 AP locations. That person has to visit all those locations and do his substantive work. So in terms of support, we're clearly lacking support from the ministry. For example, a couple of years ago, there was flooding in Sangre Grande. A lot of beekeepers lost all of their colonies, and there was no compensation for any of the beekeepers, whereas other farmers get compensation from flood loss.
So we definitely need to look at, I mean, we need, the whole picture needs to be looked at. That's the stance of the TTB this morning, correct?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's get some closing comments from you both before we wrap this morning. Darren, let's start with you. Any closing comments for Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, with respect to the regulations, the TTB has some suggested solutions in terms of, one, decreasing the fines that are proposed to be imposed on beekeepers, because to have a beekeeper pay a $100,000 fine for something as simple as not having a hive with movable frames or movable parts inside, which is absurd because the natural behavior of bees is to actually intertwine their combs to make unmovable combs.
Okay.
So to submit a naturally occurring animal to unnatural laws is kind of absurd, I think, especially with respect to the detrimental $100,000 fine. The other thing would be to maybe increase the cost of a honey importation permit on the proposed amendment, which is $100 proposedly. Maybe to something more substantive, because you would also be facilitating a decrease in actual interest in the industry and more of a facilitation of importation of a product that we don't really need to import. The other aspect would be to maybe revisit the availability of land tenure to beekeepers and make access to the forested lands more accessible to the beekeeping industry.
Okay, and Marlon?
So in terms of opening the market for imports, what I would actually recommend is that the government actually implement proper testing of honey, which is clearly lacking here in Trinidad and Tobago. And in terms of beekeepers, just making more of it more easily for beekeepers to access land tenure areas. Simple.
Okay. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing this morning. Hoping we can have you back on soon and continue the conversation. Have a wonderful day. Speaking about the impact of the amendment to the Beekeepers Bill on the local industry this morning on the Now Morning Show, joining us Darren Mahabir and Marlon Cowie Clark. Stay tuned. We have a bit more of the Now Morning Show to share with you.